It's the Wilk Report. I'm Uncle Wilk coming to you from Cleveland. With me is Larry Bernard. Welcome, Larry.
Hello.
All right, so we are talking about CBS. Why? Because the postmortems are already pretty much done on Solo and Star Wars, and rumors are flying that Kathleen Kennedy is stepping down in September. But
knives are getting sharpened.
Yeah, but these are just rumors, and nothing's been officially announced yet. So until then,
we can talk about a bloodbath that's actually happening right now.
Yeah, which brings me to to the things going on between Viacom and CBS. And just for the record, I used to work for Blockbuster Video back in the mid-'90s to 2001, back when they were owned by Viacom and making some pretty questionable decisions even then. So just so you know, in the interest of full disclosure. So anyway, let's go ahead and share some screens. Because as it turns out, the real reason Sheri Redstone wants CBS and Viacom to merge has been revealed in court documents. And her end game is to combine the two and then sell it to the highest bidder, figuring that she'll get a bigger chunk of money than she would if she sold them separately. And Verizon is also getting in on this. But here's the thing. From the complaint that CBS has filed, Ms. Redstone discussed NAI's long-term plans for CBS, focusing on a two-step process starting with a merger with Viacom that would strengthen both entities and continuing thereafter with a sale or merger of the stronger combined entity, with NAI open to the possibility of relinquishing its voting control as part of that second transaction. So, yeah, that's what she's planning on doing, is combining the two companies and selling them for a profit that she wouldn't get if they were separate. So what are your thoughts?
Well, first, the separation of Viacom and CBS was a terrible decision. It's made both companies weaker. Paramount movies have been rapidly declining in overall quality. And as there's been sort of a horizontal leavening of the IP distribution field, with things like Disney developing its own streaming service, Netflix becoming essentially the largest entertainment entity in the pool, and all of this, and the AT&T merger with Time Warner, which hopefully will never end up going to pass fully. They were several steps behind the eight ball on everybody with doing that separation. The only way they're going to remain competitive is at least to get back together. But I don't see how this is in Verizon's long-term interests. I mean, Verizon bought Yahoo to attempt to get into that business, but that all blew up in their face. I don't know how they integrate CBS in a way that makes sense for them as a company.
Yeah, and just to give you a bit more of an example of what's going on, all right, so CBS is not able to stop Sheri Redstone from interfering with the key board meeting. Now, the annual shareholders meeting was supposed to take place last month. It's been pushed back to August. My guess is that Redstone is trying to get a vote together that will not only allow her to keep her controlling share in CBS, because keep in mind, even though she doesn't run the network, she still owns a controlling share of CBS as part of National Amusement Incorporated. So that has been pushed back to August. And let's see.
Another fascinating thing, even though the merger with Verizon doesn't make any sense, I think there would be a whole lot less antitrust implications from that merger if it were to go through.
Yeah. So, but here's the thing. We've got an administration in Washington right now that really has no interest whatsoever in stopping any mergers. In fact, actually, since the 1980s, there really has not been much pushback in terms of antitrust legislation being enforced. I mean, the entire Obama regime failed to really stop much in the way of corporate mergers. Obviously, the Trump regime is not interested in stopping any
Except for they're slowing down AT&T Time Warner.
Yeah.
Because of the whole fake news controversy.
Yeah, I don't think it's so much the fake news controversy. Is that this represents a consolidation of a media faction that is presently not liked by the president regime.
Mm.
Because if it were, say, Comcast, then I don't think there would be any problem. And there doesn't seem to be any hint that Trump will try to stop Disney from buying up Fox, or perhaps Comcast from buying up Fox, because I guess they're trying to head Disney off of the pass over there. So I'm not so sure it has to do really with fake news so much as, deciding which of our friends gets to merge, and, if someone we don't like wants to merge, well, we're going to throw a monkey wrench into that.
Though Trump's probably not a fan of Comcast as much as he is of Fox. So if push came to shove, he would probably put a thumb on that scale if he can.
Yeah. So, but, in terms of mergers, like you pointed out, Viacom and CBS merging back together would be in the best interest, but whose best interest? Because Redstone wants to sell it off. Well, first of all, who would she sell it off to? And on top of that, really, what does this mean for Les Moonves? Because Les Moonves, who runs CBS, wants to keep his job, and that's not going to happen if this merger goes through, at least in the way that Sheri Redstone wants. Because right now, like I said, Verizon wants to get in on this, and they are making their own moves. So, obviously they haven't learned any lessons from Yahoo. So, ordinarily this would be huge news according to Forbes.com, but I guess National Amusements and CBS, they've got this feud going. So this would basically, because of the lawsuit, and the lawsuit actually has been denied. CBS made a poor argument because what they want to do is they want to try and get controlling interest away from Sheri Redstone so that they can stop the merger. But, Verizon apparently is under pressure from Wall Street to grow its own content business, formerly known as Yahoo. And
let's look at some of those other Viacom properties. Showtime really hasn't done anything interesting in a very long time to really hook in the audiences. I mean, they're getting passed up by like Encore and HBO that's just head over feet above them in quality content. You have Comedy Central, basically kind of MTV and maybe BET. Those would be the only real value targets for Verizon to be able to sell. Say, hey, you can get streaming Comedy Central on your phone. You can get streaming BET onto your phone. You can get streaming MTV if you really want it on your phone. But there ain't a whole lot there. I mean, with the AT&T merger with Time Warner, you can get HBO to go built into your phone. You can get this, you can get that. You get more content streamed in. But that gives them a really unfair advantage in the marketplace.
Yeah, and again, none of our government officials really seems to have a problem with unfair advantages for monopolies. That's partly this is because the Telecommunications Act of 1996 allowed for greater media consolidation. So you're not going to see a whole lot in the way of stopping much of this. But here's an interesting thing, going back to the Verizon article. Because Verizon owns Oath Content Business, but those properties also include the Huffington Post, the colludes Yahoo Finance. Moreover, Rosenblatt Securities analyst Alan Gould argues, quoting from the article, that Verizon is a better fit for CBS than Viacom because CBS has a small footprint in the cable, which would include Showtime, CBS Sports Network, and Smithsonian, and feature film businesses compared with Viacom's Paramount Studios and MTV networks. So, yeah, so there's, some.
That's not enough. That's not enough juice for Verizon to really make it worth their while to buy it up. They really are in a better position. They get the whole enchilada.
Right. So my guess,
Sheri Redstone has stake in the Verizon board. She's probably getting Verizon to buy up a larger share of CBS so she can ally with Verizon in the board meeting whenever that gets set up.
Right, because and like I said, I think it's been pushed back to August. But here's the thing: if Redstone is successful in this, if she's able to merge Viacom and CBS under her control, and she sells it off to Verizon, they pay a bigger amount than they would if the two companies were separate and Verizon just bought CBS. Now, from a purely business standpoint, this would seem to be a smarter move because basically you're making Verizon pay more than it otherwise would. So that would explain why Verizon is kind of making its own moves to get CBS before Viacom does, because it doesn't want to have to shell out money if it doesn't have to.
Yeah, that's certainly another angle too, but I don't see how just getting CBS benefits Verizon, whereas getting Viacom and CBS benefits Verizon more. Though there's still going to be the small fish in the pond if AT&T Time Warner goes through. And they're definitely going to be smaller than the Disney-Fox merger.
Yeah, and unless of course Comcast succeeds in getting Fox, but that's a whole other argument. But here's the thing: it's like really the only reason CBS seems to want to be stopping this from taking place is because Les Moonves wants to keep his job, which let's face it, he doesn't deserve to keep it after all he's done to start.
No.
Not to mention some of CBS's other shows. For example, the nepotism over at CBS right now is pretty thick because Moonves gave his wife a spot on one of the no talent shows, which, frankly, I never quite understood the whole American Idol phenomenon either, because you've got a bunch of people who are competing to become the next corporate-owned entity, and it's like, but it all sounds fake.
It was like the third or fourth American Idol. There was some guy who dropped out early. He didn't get cut. He just dropped out because he actually had an actual lawyer review the contract he would have had to have signed to go on to the next round. And the producers were talking very seriously about him going deep into the show, possibly to the finals. And he said, and I quote, "I didn't know slavery was still legal in this country."
Yeah, and this is a kind of programming that CBS has been embracing. That's when it's not putting out its paywall streaming service, which again, CBS and YouTube Red and a couple of others, they're kind of coming late into the game because Netflix is already light years ahead. And in fact, one reason why I suspect the FCC decided under its present leadership to revoke net neutrality was so that the established cable and satellite companies could squeeze the streaming services and kind of like deny them bandwidth and other resources that they need in order to function adequately. Netflix might survive such a thing because it's been around the longest, but if you're like, say, CBS and you're coming late to the game, or if we're say YouTube Red, well, the biggest thing that you're relying on is bandwidth, and if you're being squeezed for bandwidth because your ISP decides, well, we don't like you and we don't want you competing with us, then that's a problem.
Google, Netflix, and Disney are big enough that they can deal with that problem.
Right, but a lot of these other entities like CBS are not. And so, I suspect that's why the Senate was finally able to be pressured to overturn those FCC changes. Now, what that might mean, because I don't know if it has to go to the House of Representatives for a vote and then to Trump.
I think, yeah.
Right. So, the fight over net neutrality is not over, but, the way this affects the media, in terms of both mergers and a lot of these streaming services, which, again, CBS is trying to get in on and possibly
but the problem
in
is
the game, because now without neutrality, they're going to have an even tougher time trying to make CBS All Access work, because that is a streaming service. It relies on bandwidth in order to function. And if they don't get the bandwidth, they can't function.
But eventually these streaming services are just going to end up creating TV shows that are run on more like a podcast model, where they cut out the networks entirely and they go straight to the audience.
Yeah, but again, you need bandwidth in order to do that. And if Comcast or Verizon decides, well, or even AT&T decides, well, we don't want you there as a competitor, well, then we're going to throttle your bandwidth, so say goodbye to your streaming service.
But the problem is if they're not producing the content people want, or, let's face it, who wants to buy 25 streaming services?
Right. And that's another thing that's going on is because you've got 25 or 30 streaming services, well, it's kind of like the fight over cable back in the 80s and 90s, where that rose up to compete with network television. And now the network, like the big three networks of CBS, ABC, and NBC, really are competing with cable and satellite. And now all those are, in addition to the networks, are competing with streaming services. So now the networks are trying to get in with the streaming services. But again, they're coming into this late in the game because Netflix has been around for how long now?
Yeah.
And now you've got
I just want a
Voodoo.
store.
Yeah.
I just want a store where I can say I want this network's content, this network's content, this network's content. And that would be the streaming service I would want.
But you can get that same with cable, though.
Yeah. I mean, that's why cable works.
Right. So, basically the streaming services are trying to do the same thing that cable tried to do, but cable has got a better infrastructure for doing it because it doesn't rely so much on bandwidth or for people being able to afford both internet and cable. So, the thing with streaming is that you're basically dividing your audiences into smaller and smaller fractions and trying to compete for the money that could otherwise just go toward cable. Because, let's say you subscribe to all your potential streaming services. Well, now, you're paying about as much as you would for cable.
Or more.
Right. So, this model, and, getting back to how this relates to CBS and Viacom and their merger, CBS has been making all these decisions that have really kind of weakened it. And if Redstone is smart, I think she'll try and, rather than sell, but, find someone she believes in, because let's face it, if Viacom is successful in getting CBS, could we see Discovery canceled in favor of something that will be broadcast on the network?
Well, allegedly
actually won't alienate fans.
Allegedly, Sheri Redstone is a Trekkie. Allegedly, she's a big fan of it.
Yeah, and that goes to another thing that between her and Moonves, because she doesn't like Moonves too much, and if she is a big Trekkie, like you said, then that's one more reason to want to get rid of Moonves because of what he's done to a favorite property of hers, and she's got the clout to actually tell him, look, I'm the controlling shareholder in CBS. You've not been making decisions that I've really thought were appropriate for the company.
And basically they're strip mining Star Trek with their current strategy.
Right.
With the whole JJ license and the way Discovery has been set up, you're basically strip mining the brand instead of growing it, which is a problem.
All right, and hold on, I've got to pause.
Okay.
All right, so we're back, and just to give you an idea of some of the drama that's going on here. All right, so we've got a timeline of stuff that's been going on from the behind-the-scenes battle with CBS and Viacom. We've got May 8th, 2015, which is the succession speculation beginning, because Sumner Redstone, who was 92 at the time, was in declining health, and his successor as chairman of CBS and Viacom would be chosen by the boards of both companies and not by any individual. Speculation was also about whether CBS and Viacom might merge 9 years after the company split in 2006. And then later that same year, after being removed as his primary caretaker and kicked out of his mansion, Redstone's former companion, Manuela Herzer, filed a lawsuit. Companion, yeah. Basically seeking to have him found mentally incompetent. And she said she wanted to return to his home and manage his care. His lawyers countered that the suit was a ploy to avoid being cut out of his will. So, a lot of this really seems to be generated more by personal animosity and, family squabbling over his will than it really does as in terms of any actual business sense. So, the Viacom and CBS board members got sued by an investor named E.F. Greenberg, who accused them of really kind of protecting Redstone's interests at the expense of the shareholders. And in addition to Redstone and his daughter Sheri, other defendants included Moonves, actually. So, yeah. So then, of course, a judge ordered an examination of Sumner, who then stepped down in 2016. But, a lot of this really has to, yeah, a lot of this is really just kind of personal animosity going on between these different factions. So, and this is why this story is just so bizarre, and why every new twist really has people scratching their heads, wondering why this can't be resolved amicably. Right, because, again, Sheri Redstone has a controlling share in CBS. So that means she owns a majority stake. So really, I don't know why Moonves even has the clout he does to be able to throw such a monkey wrench into these plans, unless, there are other people besides himself who really don't want Redstone having any controlling interest.
Also, you get into the whole fact that Viacom and Paramount have lost their ability to get funding out of China for new movie productions as well recently over the whole Star Trek debacle.
Yeah, because, again, you handed Star Trek over to people who neither understand it nor care to understand it, and who make movies according to a checklist and then try and write the story around that laundry list of stuff that you want to have in the movie. And that's actually the opposite of what good storytelling is, whereas you write the story and then you have those little laundry list of whatever you want to that those have to fit into the story. You can't just throw them in there. But now movie makers are doing the reverse, because apparently, corporate mentality says, we have to have, X amount of this and X amount of that. In fact,
there's somebody who takes Save the Cat and does a quantitative analysis of how much a movie adheres to the principles of Save the Cat to how much money it makes.
Yeah, and right.
How valuable the stars are featured in those little blocks.
Yeah, and someone did an analysis of Michael Bay movies and discovered that the movies make money based on how many explosions come on, which is why you see so many explosions, even when it's not necessary. I mean, you could actually make an entire Michael Bay movie nothing but explosions. Like,
I would buy a ticket for that. I'm not gonna lie.
Like you start up, your main character in the movie gets up in the morning, goes to brush his teeth, the sink explodes.
No.
He goes to make breakfast, the stove explodes, the whole house goes
Universal
up in flames.
Studios production. You see the Universal logo, and then the planet Earth blows up. That's how you start the movie.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, but that's the whole Michael Bay model. It really disheartens me that this is a model that, and it actually got started back in the 90s, but it was so gradual that you didn't notice it. So that now, the entire movie making industry in Hollywood, and at least as far as blockbuster movies are concerned, is, doing movies according to the checklist.
Yeah.
Which, and we've seen how this has affected Star Wars, for example, where, you've got this laundry list of stuff that somebody wants done, and then the director just goes ahead and shoots the scenes around them and then tries to tie it together with some kind of loose narrative. And it's just not working. So, that's the problem that Paramount has. It's a problem that Disney has now with Lucasfilm anyway. Marvel.
I still wrap my head around that speech Mark Hamill gave to Oxford, where he talked about how he signed on to doing these new movies when he thought George was going to do them and not Disney.
Yeah, and now he's basically done with Star Wars, because he's got, after the way Johnson burned him and killed off Luke Skywalker, he just is no longer interested. Obviously, Harrison Ford's not coming back because he got what he wanted, which was to kill off Han Solo. So, going into all this, but, so CBS and Paramount, they're in a real bind here. And right now, I'm wondering, even if Redstone is successful, if she merges Viacom and CBS back together, and whether she keeps them or sells them off, is it going to make any difference? Are we seeing really the death of Viacom and CBS, whether individually or combined? They're still probably not going to survive in their present form much past the next few years.
Yeah, they're not. And again, the merger with Verizon is the only thing that makes sense for both companies in the long run, but that's just going to be terrible for us as consumers of media.
Yeah, and right now I think there actually needs to be less consolidation. In fact, for all the mistakes that people think Sumner Redstone made when he divided CBS and Viacom, I think he was actually being very smart, because he realized, at some point, you're going to reach a point in history where there's so much consolidation that everything is under one umbrella, but then you stifle creativity, you stifle innovation. And
or you look at some of the problems that advanced AIs that are used by really big businesses do. When you have 5, 6, 7 companies, even without thinking about it, they all collaborate with each other just because they all think the same way, because they all have the same goal.
Right. And, that affects how product is churned out. Again, look at the approach that was taken to Star Wars by Disney. Even if Disney hadn't bought it, let's say Fox had bought out Star Wars. Let's say, Viacom had bought it out instead of Disney, which, I don't see how that would have happened. But let's say, for example, that it had, or say AT&T or Verizon or Comcast, we would have seen the exact same content put out as under Disney, because, as you pointed out, there's this whole sameness of thought and approach to, making content, where it's all, focus group driven and trying to appeal to as many demographics as possible. And I think that's actually one of the things that people misinterpret when they look at Kennedy's use of identity politics.
Intersectional feminism is a popular trend in the cultural zeitgeist right now, so we need to incorporate intersectional feminist themes into Star Wars.
Right, and it's really kind of cynical corporate mentality at work here, because they really don't give a shit about that. I mean, the same thing's going on at CBS under Les Moonves, where, okay, well, we want this to appeal to as many demographics as possible, so we need the Black demographic, we need the LGBT demographic, we need the female demographic. We don't need the male demographic quite as much because they're a built-in audience, they'll stay no matter what. So they want to try to appeal to as many people as possible. But the thing is, though, and they're ignoring the proverb, is you try and please everyone, you're going to end up pleasing no one. And that's what we're seeing.
And the problem isn't the plan for something like Star Trek Discovery. The problem was the execution. And a lot of the things they did wrong in the execution, they did because of the stupid IP divide caused by the separation of CBS and Viacom.
Right, and because people forget, Gene Roddenberry actually was probably the forerunner to social justice warriors, but he did it right with writing that actually didn't insult people, that actually challenged people's notions in a way that made them think. And
like
the times, because you got the civil
famous
rights movement going on during that period, so that appealed to people.
Like the episode about the Klingons and the Federation having the truce because of the Organians. Every single writer who is involved in writing that script and most of the production team were guys who had fought in Vietnam and in Korea.
Yeah.
So
and
the realness to that episode.
Right, and so the Federation and the Klingons were basically the stand-in for the United States and the Soviet Empire during the Cold War. And what happens when they bring their Cold War to somebody's doorstep who has the power to say, hold on a minute, motherfucker, just stop what you're doing, because now you're making things inconvenient for us. So, at this point, but that's the kind of writing, though, that they were able to pull off that, again, didn't insult people, it didn't talk down to them or play to the lowest common denominator, and it didn't pander. And, that I think is one of the biggest reasons why we're seeing such a backlash against what people are wrongly calling social justice warrior movies, is not so much that they're trying to be inclusive to all demographics, although I think, there's an argument for why you shouldn't do it cynically, but, it's the idea that you're being pandered to.
Mm-hmm. Actually, if you go to the Council Geeks YouTube channel, they have a guy who did a very long rant talking about how Lando's pansexual, how that's just bait for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. And he started going through a long list of all the times they were baiting them like that, but not showing anything meaty or substantive in the character or in the story. The problem is that to somebody who doesn't dissect media, who doesn't take an interest in that, somebody who just sits in a movie, shuts off their brain for 90 minutes, and eats popcorn, you're not going to necessarily think about it, but it's deeply and profoundly cynical. And you're going to, the first few times you see that, you're going to be like saying, wow, that character has purple hair like me. I feel I'm included. The more you see it, the more your brain begins to realize it's just a deeply, profoundly cynical and nihilistic approach.
Yeah, and that goes to, again, with this whole merger, it's like nobody seems to be thinking about the human element here, because once this merger drama plays out, however it goes, at the end of the day, we're still going to be getting the same exact crap content out of CBS and Paramount and whatever other property Viacom owns that, we've been getting for the last 10, 15 years. And, as Paramount is experiencing now, and as Lucasfilm is experiencing now, there's a law of diminishing returns where at some point, when you have insulted your audience to the point where nobody wants to go see the new movies, or nobody wants to go behind another paywall to watch a mediocre TV show that you've overhyped and overproduced, because they don't want to be cynically pandered to. They want something that actually has substance.
A show that did a self-reboot on its 4th episode because they completely screwed it up on the 1st episode, and they did the actual retooling of the show during the 3rd episode.
Yeah, and right, and then shows like Cobra Kai, which is on YouTube Red, end up becoming the exception to the rule, where that actually respects the original material and the people who are fans of it, and also draws in new fans by way of the writing. Because obviously it's tailored to younger audiences, just as the first trilogy was. But again, you're seeing this thing where that becomes the exception. And
I have to wonder if some of that has to do with the fact that Ralph Macchio and the guy who plays Johnny, whose name is completely escaping,
William Zabka.
Maybe it's the fact that they really haven't done much of anything else outside of that property, which really brought the quality to it, that they wanted this to be something meaningful because they didn't know that they were going to necessarily get a second season, that this little nostalgia train was going to ride out for them for a while.
Right, and because they're, I don't want to call them B-level talent, but they are basically trying to rebuild their careers on the strength of the movie that made those careers in the first place. And so they're coming in like they're like in their 50s now, and but they're not quite the draw as that they would be if they were, say, Tom Cruise, or let's say another 80s icon. I'm trying to think of. Well, Arnold Schwarzenegger can't act to save his life. That's why he keeps doing the Terminator movie.
Well,
denied him because he can't.
He can act, but it takes the right director to get a good performance out of him.
Yeah, like the guy,
like Verhoeven,
right? Or End of Days, where he actually had to act, and that was actually, in my opinion, his performance. But
Body Heat was also excellent, one of his early movies.
Yeah.
Conan was an underrated performance. I don't like his Conan so much because I've read the books, and there's much more depth to the character, but given the quality of adaptions you got in the 80s, it was still a good movie.
Right. And, so, wrapping up, because I think we've pretty much exhausted all we can
CBS,
out of the CBS.
Yeah.
But, it just seems to me like no matter how this turns out, the only thing that's really going to save CBS or Paramount or Viacom, regardless, is go back to storytelling basics. You cannot make a content based on pandering to demographics. You have to do it with good writing, good acting, good direction, and you really have to have a vision going forward of what you want to do and how you're going to get there. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is like what's going on with Lucasfilm right now, where you've got a property that made and broke records and is one of the most popular and profitable franchises in cinema history, to one that loses money within the space of 3 years, which is unprecedented. And Paramount's decline has been, much longer in the making. So, I think there's going to have to be some.
Thing they have now is like the Fast and the Furious movies, or is that Universal does those?
I think that's Universal. I could be wrong. I don't really watch those, but from what I understand, the reason those movies keep doing so well is because, one, they respect the fans and they respect the audience. And, after 8 movies, I think they've kind of, learned, what their audience likes, and they give it to them.
Yeah.
So, even if you have a situation where, I know what to expect from this, but, it's better that than trying to deliberately go out of your way and call the audience assholes for having these expectations, because
or if you're going to radically change something. I mean, I mocked it when it first came out because I thought it was a dumb idea. But, the Ocean's movies, it was originally just a goof that Frank Sinatra and his friends filmed in Las Vegas one year. And then George Clooney made 1.5 good movies out of it. So yeah, nobody cares that you're going to recast the whole movie with women and make a slight tweak to the premise. No,
Yeah.
nobody's.
Right. And, I think that's what they're using to try and sell it. But from what I've heard from the people who have seen it so far, is it actually is just a somewhat good, well-written heist movie, and they're not actually focusing on it being women so much as just telling the story. Now, if that's true, then, I hope it does well. But, if it's just going to be, I think
tracking to be number one this weekend, but there's not a whole lot of competition.
Right. Yeah, because all the big movies have been released already for the summer, so they're not going to have anything really.
And Solo did its 77% decline with a 50% decline the weekend following that.
Yeah, so it's it's benefiting from low expectations, which is good. I think if this movie had been released a couple months earlier, it probably wouldn't have done so well. But and that's just simply because of the nature of the competition.
And then you have The Incredibles coming up
right.
the weekend. I think it's next weekend, which is going to be the big event movie for June.
Yeah, and that's another one that is a hot property by Disney because Pixar has done well, Marvel has done well. For all people keep claiming franchise fatigue as a reason for Solo declining, it's nonsense because the Marvel movies, you just had Black Panther and Avengers Infinity War released within a couple of months of one another, and they're both still going
Thor
strong.
Ragnarok before that.
Right. So, obviously people are not suffering from franchise fatigue. They're suffering from Star Wars fatigue, and that only because they've had...
we just want a good Star Wars movie.
Right.
That's all we're asking for.
Right.
And it's been basically since Return of the Jedi since we've had a good Star Wars movie.
Yeah, and I keep getting this thought into my head, and that is, in politics, just for the record, I'm a flaming lefty, and when I complain about the state of politics, or when I voice my membership in the Green Party, people say, you want perfection. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. It's like, well, no one's asking for perfection. We just want something that's good, but you're saddling us with stuff that's either mediocre or downright horrible. So, we want a good Star Wars movie. We're not asking for much. We just want a good movie that, plays to expectations and, actually, maybe kind of not only lets us recapture our childhoods, but also appeals to the next generation because we want our kids to have their generation. Star Wars, because, and this is another thing that, Disney really does not understand the property because they thought they could just churn these movies out and infinitum, and they didn't realize Star Wars is something you do once in a generation. So you had the original trilogy that appealed to the baby boomers who were growing up in the shadow of the 60s. Then you had the Generation Xers who were starting to come of age in the 90s and early 2000s.
But who grew up watching the original.
Right. And, so I think people were expecting something that, now the millennials could watch because, they were kids when the prequel trilogy came out. They saw that and maybe some liked it, maybe some didn't, but they wanted their kids now to have something that they could have for their generation. And they not only didn't get it, but they've also been basically told that they are racist and sexist and, whatever, for not liking what was put out. And it's
just want a fun Star Wars movie.
Right.
And that's too much to ask.
Right. And then we're getting Star Wars movies that nobody asked for. I can't remember anyone saying, oh, hey, I want to see the story of how the Death Star plans were stolen. I want to see the story of Han Solo.
How did Han Solo get his gun?
Right. It's a blaster, for crying out loud. And then, of course, again, you retcon in a pair of golden dice that was never shown in any of the previous movies, and then you build a whole movie around those dice as though it's supposed to mean something. It's like, come on, nobody asked for this. And and nobody really asked for a new Star Trek series, that was going to be like Battlestar Galactica, because if you think about it, one of the reasons Battlestar Galactica reboot was so controversial was because, the writers insisted on injecting all this sex and violence and political messaging, which I'm not so opposed to political messaging as long as you do it right. because, again, look at the original Star Trek. That was nothing but political messaging half the time, and a lot of it worked.
And you had Adama basically being treated like a military strongman type figure throughout the show, that people were looking to him to be the dictator. And then you had the whole colony arc where they were basically doing the Iraq War, but on a planet. It had a lot of bad decisions.
Yeah.
And the original came out that weird zeitgeist thing because of Eric Von Daniken and the whole ancient aliens theory being really popular at that time in the 70s.
Yeah, and now they're trying to update that for the early 2000s, and it just didn't work. But so basically, Alex Kurtzman came off of that to write for CBS for Discovery, and basically he's been spending all this time trying to prove that Battlestar Galactica was actually good, and that he's not a bad writer, and that he doesn't destroy popular franchises. So it's like, yeah, and again, a lot of this goes to Les Moonves and Kathleen Kennedy and people who just neither understand the property nor do they want to, because to them it's just
they just want the money from the property.
Right, they're trying to milk it for every last penny, and so they turn it over to people who think that the originals needed to be tweaked or fixed when they didn't, because you try to fix something that's not broken and you end up breaking it.
And also, ironically, Star Trek Discovery also had production drama, which also led to a mediocre substandard product. And the person who was fired was the person who was a very strong advocate of the original Star Trek vision and roadmap.
Yeah, and now we see where CBS is in a very weak position, because if they had kept Brian Fuller, I think, was that Brian Fuller?
Yeah.
So if they kept him around and kept Nicholas Meyer around and had them do the show, because Nicholas Meyer directed Star Trek 2.
Mm.
I think Star Trek 6 as well, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
they said two movies are some for bait for, hey, we might do a con series, you guys.
Right, and obviously that's not going to happen now. But what really kills me is that instead of keeping these guys around who actually know what they're doing and respect the material, they decided to go with the guy who basically said, I hate the original series, and
my wife had to explain to me what Star Trek was.
Right. and so now CBS is in a position where, if they come out with a good show that actually respected the material and the fans, would they be in this position right now where they're having to fend off a hostile takeover from a majority shareholder and
possibly a second hostile takeover from Verizon?
Exactly. So, again, for people who wonder, why we've digressed so much from the original topic, but it really kind of all comes down to this mindset that is present across Hollywood right now that has really kind of resulted in these decisions that have now hurt CBS. And
you even look at The Walking Dead, when The Walking Dead kind of broke paths from its original creator. And then they started going off on another tangent, and then The Walking Dead started dropping off as a series.
Yeah, and now that's winding down, but you've got this thing where now Les Moonves, if he had produced a good show, would he be in danger of losing his job if this merger goes through as Sheri Redstone wants it? Because Redstone has never liked Moonves.
If people love Star Trek Discovery enough to buy the CBS All Access app, then obviously he would been able to roll out tons of new content, and the All Access app would be a hit, and he would be the hero, and there'd be no talk of merging again. Viacom would have to find a new way to save their company.
Right, and now we are here where we are because of the attitude. And going forward, I just don't know how this is going to play out. But again, if Redstone is looking to buy up CBS simply so she could push out Moonves and settle old scores and then sell off the combined company for a profit, well, what does that say about her character and how she approaches it? Because if she wants a new Star Trek show that respects the original and that actually continues on from, like, say, a post-Voyager timeline, because I don't see why we have to keep doing all these prequels. if you're going to make a prequel to anything, how about set it between the events of Star Trek 6 and the pilot episode for The Next Generation?
Yeah, there's a lot of time there that could be fun.
Right. So, you don't have to necessarily, keep doing everything, because, they tried to take the prequel to the original Star Trek show and apply today's special effects and visuals to it, and it just doesn't work because, you can't, I mean,
at least Enterprise, for all its faults, tried to create a retro aesthetic that looked like it was a precursor technology.
Right. And, what does it say when Enterprise, which didn't even call itself Star Trek for the first 2.5 seasons of its 4-season run, is considered better than Discovery?
That's the depressing endpoint, I think, for this episode.
Yeah. So yeah. Like I said, it'll be interesting to see where all this goes. Just let me just do one more final screen share here, because scrolling down, a standing O for Moonves, and a win for the Redstones. In the midst of the legal battle, Moonves appears at the annual upfront presentation at Carnegie Hall in New York City, prompting a rare standing ovation from Madison Avenue. How's your week been? Obviously, because he's been having these problems, but I guess Madison Avenue seems to be on his side. At least he wants them to appear to be on his side. But at the same time, the court is not being all that kind to Moonves, because the judge refused to issue a temporary restraining order against the Redstone family. Wall Street's not happy about it, but CBS shares have fallen to $51.61 as of May 17th, and that's down from $60.53 per share as of December. So CBS board members who are not associated with the Redstones cannot be happy with this, because right now this is hurting CBS, and that might be Redstone's goal, so that she can have a better time buying it up.
Mm-hmm.
But again,
or she might try the old classic scheme of taking the company private and then selling it to Verizon, making money off the company going private, and then making money off the Verizon sale.
Yeah, and as of the 31st, so yeah, not even 2 weeks ago, I think, CBS shareholders have struck back. The stockholder group filed a class action lawsuit against the Redstones, asking a judge to rule that non-voting shareholders are entitled to a special dividend that would give them a say in CBS's business dealings, just as the Redstones suit went after CBS at Les Moonves. The CBS stockholder lawsuit takes aim at Redstone specifically, accusing her of breaching her fiduciary duties to Class B shareholders and calling her recent move to amend CBS's bylaws invalid. So, like I said, a lot of this really just seems more like pointless bickering over the remains of Sumner Redstone's empire. And that's hurting CBS, it's hurting Viacom. And, that in turn is probably why Les Moonves, who's made his own share of bad decisions, is so hot to try and stop this, because of his poor decisions and his personal faults and failings, has brought CBS to a bad place. So, as far as I'm concerned, I don't see any real angels here in this.
No. But I think that this does it for us this week. I guess we're going to talk about the Halloween movie coming out, which sounds exciting.
Yeah, and that is being a huge John Carpenter fan, and especially of the original Halloween movies up to Part 6. I didn't care for anything after that, except maybe for Rob Zombie's first reboot, but that's a whole other story we'll get into next time. So anyway, that's it. This is Michael Wilk and Larry Bernard saying take care, good night, we're out.